Welcome back, Influence Decoders, to another deep dive here on Decoded Influence. You know, the drill, we're all about uncovering those hidden forces, shaping the choices we make and the actions we take.
hmm
And today,
Right.
we're taking a closer look
Yeah.
at what we're calling data druids.
All right.
And before anyone pictures, folks in robes chanting in some secluded forest,
Right.
we're actually talking about something arguably even more powerful.
Yeah, that's right. We're diving deep into the systems and the companies that are gathering all that data,
Hmm.
analyzing it, and then using it.
Right.
Think big tech, data brokers, advertisers, even political campaigns. They're all players in this data-driven world.
So it's bigger than just those targeted ads that seem to follow us around online.
Absolutely.
It feels like this data druid concept is hinting at something much bigger.
Way bigger, way bigger. And what's really both fascinating and a little concerning is that unlike hackers who operate outside the law, these data druids, they're working within legal boundaries. They're using the information we often willingly give up sometimes without even realizing it to predict and possibly manipulate our behavior.
Okay, so let's break this down.
Yeah.
How exactly are these data druids using our data? Can you give our listeners like a real-world example of how this plays out?
Yeah, think about that story of Target.
Oh,
Figuring out a teenager was pregnant before her own father knew.
right.
It was all based on what she was buying, unscented lotions, vitamins, certain minerals.
Wow.
It's a classic example of how data druids can extract super personal insights from what seems like really ordinary data points.
The Target story it's always kind of chilling to me,
Oh, for sure.
just because it highlights how much these companies potentially know.
Hmm.
And that brings us to the next part, the potential for real-world harm. We're not just talking about, you know, a minor inconvenience here, right?
No, no, not at all. This goes way beyond just annoying ads. We're talking about potential for manipulation, discrimination, even harm. Just look at the Cambridge Analytica scandal and its role in those elections, or think about those ads that specifically target vulnerable people, those struggling with addiction or financial issues. This kind of data exploitation can have serious consequences.
You mentioned Cambridge Analytica, which was a huge wake-up call for a lot of people, but are there other examples that really highlight the dangers of data misuse, maybe on an even larger scale?
Absolutely. The situation in Myanmar is a chilling example. Data collected by these data druids was used to target the Rohingya people with very inflammatory messages, fueling violence and contributing to a humanitarian crisis. It shows how data exploitation can be used as a weapon with really terrifying results.
That's a really sobering thought. It's clear that we're not just talking about privacy here, but about the potential for real harm, even violence. It seems like the line between helpful personalization and harmful manipulation can get pretty blurry. So how are these data druids using our psychology to achieve their goals? Are they just showing us stuff we like, or is there something more going on?
It's much more complex than just showing us things we might enjoy. They're tapping into our fears, our anxieties, and desires.
Oh, wow.
This can create a sense of what some experts call predictive despair, this feeling that the algorithms know us better than we know ourselves, and that we're stuck on this predetermined path.
This idea of predictive despair, it's powerful.
Mm.
And I think a lot of our listeners can relate to that feeling of being kind of boxed in by algorithms.
Mm.
So how do these data druids actually tap into our emotions? It feels almost invasive.
Well, they use this tactic called adversarial empathy.
Adversarial empathy.
It's a bit unsettling, but basically, platforms are analyzing our online activity to find our emotional triggers.
Yeah.
You know, what makes us angry or anxious, or do we tend to gravitate towards content that makes us feel inadequate or envious? They use this information to keep us engaged, even if it means playing on our negative emotions.
So they're not just predicting what we'll click on. They're actively trying to make us feel certain things to keep us hooked.
Yeah.
That's a pretty unsettling thought. It feels like we're constantly being nudged and manipulated without even realizing it.
Yeah.
So what can we do about it? Are we just powerless against these data druids?
Not at all. We're not saying you have to completely disconnect, but understanding how these systems work is the first step towards taking back some control. And that leads us to the concept of data vandalism.
Data vandalism. Okay, that sounds interesting. Tell me more. We're talking about like hacking into these systems?
No, it's not about illegal activity. Data
Yeah.
vandalism is about understanding how our data is being used and then finding creative ways to disrupt those systems, to poison the well, so to speak.
Oh.
By making our data less accurate or less useful for manipulation, we can push back against these data druids.
So we're fighting fire with fire.
In a way, yes.
I like that. What are some specific tactics our listeners can use to become data vandals? Give us the inside scoop.
One simple but effective tactic is using burner emails. Create a dedicated email address just for signing up for online services. That way you can track who's buying and selling your data without your permission.
That's brilliant. So I can see which companies are playing fast and loose with my information. What else can we do to disrupt these systems?
There are browser extensions that can help you kind of mask your digital profile. They randomly like or engage with content, making it harder for those algorithms to categorize you and predict your behavior.
So it's like creating a digital smokescreen. I
Oh,
love it. Are there any other ways to join the data vandal movement?
absolutely. You can join forces with others and swarm platforms with false data, basically overwhelming their models with noise and making them less effective. Imagine thousands of people signing up for a protest they're not going to, or liking a product they'd never buy. The possibilities are endless.
So it's about introducing chaos into the system, making the data they collect less reliable and therefore less valuable. That's a powerful idea. And you know what? There's something really satisfying about using their own tactics against them.
I completely agree. There's a real sense of empowerment in taking back control of your digital footprint, and it can be surprisingly fun.
Speaking of fun, have you heard about the data vandal who became a superhuman athlete in the eyes of the algorithms?
You're talking about Decoder Leela, right?
Yes.
Yes, she manipulated her Fitbit data to make it look like she was sleeping with a heart rate of 200 beats per minute and sprinting at 3 a.m.
That's amazing what happened.
Well, the algorithms labeled her as a superhuman athlete and started sending her ads for Olympic level training programs and hilariously, even steroids. It just shows you that these systems aren't as smart as they want us to think.
It really highlights that we're dealing with lines of code, not all knowing oracles. They can be manipulated, and that's where we can take back some of our power.
Exactly. Data vandalism can be both creative and subversive. It's about exposing the absurdity of these systems and reminding ourselves that we're not powerless in the face of data exploitation.
Dakota Lilla's story is a great example of how we can use humor and creativity to challenge these systems. But for our listeners who are just starting to think about data vandalism, what's a good first step? Where do we even begin?
I think the most important thing is awareness. Start paying attention to those ads. You see the content that pops up in your feeds, the recommendations you get. Ask yourself, why am I seeing this? What data might be influencing these suggestions?
So don't just passively consume. Question, the algorithms become a more conscious participant in the digital world, but how do we even know what data we're sharing, especially the stuff we're not even aware of?
It's about being mindful of that digital footprint, every click, every scroll, even how long you hover over a certain post. It's all being tracked and analyzed. Think about the apps you use, the websites you visit, the devices you connect to. It can feel overwhelming, but just starting to notice these things is a big step.
Right, it's not about disconnecting entirely, but about making more informed choices. So let's say I'm ready to embrace my inner data vandal. What's one small active data disruption I can try this week? Something simple but effective.
Here's a fun one. Next time you're online, deliberately seek out content that's totally outside your usual interests. If you always read about politics, spend some time browsing gardening articles if you're a diehard sports fan. Delve into the world of fashion blogs.
Interesting. So it's about throwing off the algorithm's assumptions about my preferences. I like that it's like a digital game of hide and seek.
Exactly. By introducing randomness into your online behavior, you make it harder for them to categorize you and predict your next move, and you might even discover some new interests along the way.
Now, some people might argue that data vandalism is pointless. They might say these companies are too big, too powerful. What difference can one person make? What
Mm.
do we say to that?
I understand that sentiment, but I believe that collective action can make a real difference. Think about it. These algorithms rely on patterns and predictability. If enough people start disrupting those patterns, it becomes much harder for them to operate effectively.
So it's about sending a message that we're not just passive consumers, we're aware of what's going on and we're not going to play by their rules.
Precisely. And remember, you're not alone in this. There's a growing movement of people who are waking up to the realities of data exploitation and taking action.
That's encouraging to hear. It's about reclaiming our agency in this digital landscape.
Absolutely. And as more people become aware and take action, we can start to push for more transparency and accountability from these data druids. We can demand more control over our data and how it's used.
So, Influence Decoders, we've taken a deep dive into the world of data druids and explored the potential harms of data exploitation. But we haven't just left you with a sense of doom and gloom. We've also empowered you with the tools and tactics of data vandalism to fight back and reclaim control. What are your key takeaways from today's conversation?
For me, it's about understanding that we're not just along for the ride in this data-driven world. We have choices we can actually impact how our data is being used and how these systems develop.
I couldn't agree more. And it all starts with that awareness. Once you understand how the game is played, you can start to change the rules.
Right. And it's important to remember that data vandalism doesn't mean becoming some tech whiz or hacker.
Right.
It's about those small, creative acts of disruption that when we all do them can actually make a big difference. Exactly. It can be as easy as using a burner email or getting a privacy-focused browser extension, or even just being mindful about mixing up the content you consume online.
Yeah, and you might even have some fun along the way, like Decoder Leela with her superhuman athlete bit.
Exactly. Taking back your digital footprint can be both empowering and entertaining.
So Influence Decoders, we've really dug deep into this world of data druids and explored the potential downsides of data exploitation, but we haven't left you hanging. We've given you the tools and tactics of data vandalism to fight back and take control. What are your big takeaways from today's conversation?
Yeah, we want to hear from you what really resonated with you today. What are your thoughts on data druids and data vandalism?
Share your experiences, your insights, your questions, even your own data vandal tactics.
Let's keep this conversation going.
Yeah, and if you're feeling inspired, what's one small act of data disruption you'll try this week?
Let's build a community of informed, empowered, and engaged influence decoders.
And as always, if you have ideas for future deep dives, let us know.
We're always searching for those interesting topics.
What mysteries of influence should we decode next?
Absolutely.
So hit that like button, share this episode with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to Decoded Influence so you don't miss out on future deep dives.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay empowered.
And remember, the best way to decode influence is to start by understanding your own.